Hello and welcome to the Ground and Grow podcast. I am your host, Kayla Estinson Williams. I'm coming back after a little break from the podcast. I've been pretty inconsistent here pretty much since my daughter, who's now about 2.5 years old, since she was born. I was like, okay, can I keep up that every other week consistency? And the answer was no. So I've been a little bit here and there, pretty inconsistent. And as I'm looking to this next year, I'm wanting to come back to different things in my life, work being one of them, in a way that is maybe a little bit more disciplined, a little bit more consistent, still holding space for all the things that I need and prioritizing family and all of that great stuff that's been so important for me. But I'm feeling some energy to connect to all of this stuff a little bit more and grow a little bit more. I'm not sure exactly what that's going to look like, but I am switching things up. I'm changing things up a little bit. And as I recommend with my clients all of the time, is we don't have to know what that plan is going to be and perfect it, but more we can look at it as this trial and error process. So I've been looking at shifting the structure of this so that it's something that's easier for me to come back to more consistently, because I think with more big topic based episodes as I've done, I've felt maybe a little bit more pressure to have some good topic that's different enough from my other episodes, that's going to be so important. And then I'm like, oh, I can't think of what that's going to be, or maybe that's too similar to a recent episode I did or whatnot. So I'm going to try out changing it to be a little more casual, which I know it already was pretty casual, but even more casual, just kind of a fun check in, do a little psycho ed on therapy related things. In a different way. And I'm going to try it out. Maybe it'll be all of my episodes. Maybe it'll be some of them, but I don't know. But one thing that I've heard some other podcasts do, which I've personally found really entertaining, and they kind of do it in a different context that I'm thinking, but they kind of will talk about things that are going on currently, or we'll go to Reddit, am I the asshole, and read through that and talk about that. And I was like, oh, you know what? That I think would be kind of a fun thing to do in a therapy context way, right? So how I'm going to restructure this is at the beginning, maybe have a little life check-in of what's currently going on in the world, or what's currently going on in my life or in my practice. See how that goes. And then find some Reddit post, or if anyone wants to write in stories, we can always talk about those too. But of one of the posts, if you are on Reddit, you're probably familiar with the different threads of, am I the asshole, or am I overreacting? And I think so often there is a very important therapy theme there, mental health theme or relational theme. And so I'm going to kind of look for ones that fit in with my different niches of either perinatal mental health, so pregnancy, postpartum, all of that stuff, or trauma, attachment stuff, relationships, right? Which I think there's a lot of juicy stuff on there. And my intention here isn't going to be to judge anybody or say what's the right thing to do or have anyone be right or wrong in the situation, but more to kind of be here's what this is. Because I think a lot of times it can be normalizing, right? Someone's like, am I overreacting for this? And most of the time I'm like, no, you're not overreacting. That's so valid to feel what you're feeling. And so allowing that to kind of be a launch point into some psycho ed, talking a little bit about, given this information, this is what I, as a therapist, might work on with this person or someone in that system. Again, not necessarily specifically that person, but just the theme of whatever they're talking about. So I think let's play around with it a little bit. Let's see how it goes. I think it'll be kind of fun. And if not, we'll change it up, right? So we can always do that. But maybe I'll start with just a little check-in, life check-in on myself, the world. So I am recording this right after Thanksgiving weekend, which for us was kind of busy. We had, in a good way, we usually, my husband and I will do both of our families' Thanksgivings on the same day. And it's really stressful and it's never fun. Because there's just this stress of okay, we've got to go here, and at a certain time we have to leave and go here, so we can't really be present with any of those individual things. And I think over these last few years we've been trying to figure out how do we want to balance both families that we really want to spend time with, but we want to be intentional and be present with them. And then I think especially like having our own little kiddo and growing our family in that way, like what are ways that we want to kind of honor our own traditions and figure this out, because it doesn't always have to forever be maybe what we grew up doing and all of that. And I think we're just slowly in the trial and error process of figuring that out. So this year we separated it out. So different families on different days, which was nice. But then a different extended family Thanksgiving got added into that, which was really fun. But it was just like 3 different events on the weekend, which is a lot no matter what. And I think it was kind of a lot with a 2.5-year-old because she did have fun with all of the things, but it was just, I noticed yesterday, which was like our first day after like not having anything, like yeah, some big toddler emotions were coming out. And I'm like, yeah, your routine's been off, your naps have been off, all of that's been kind of tough. And so it was a nice trial and error. And now we know next year, like, let's whittle it down a little bit more. We're kind of having conversations about like, what do we want like the Christmas holiday to look like? Because we really enjoy that time of the year and want to hold space for our own little family of 3 traditions too. So to be continued, but we're continuing to figure that out. But it did feel nicer than having all of our Thanksgiving things on one day, because that usually is just like a stressful day that we don't really enjoy, right? We enjoy moments of it, but overall we're kind of overwhelmed doing so much in one day. So this was an improvement. So step 1 is done. We've made some progress on it. And yeah, with that, if you have a baby, a toddler, you know, naps can run the world. And if you follow me on Instagram, you probably know that our nap situation has been interesting. So my kiddo has like little, like daytime sleep needs are pretty small. And so she's been slowly getting out of her nap, I think. Like she's had, I think, seasons where she's been in developmental leaps where those naps just go away, but they come back and it's just kind of a slow phase. But she's been in this phase for a while of kind of napping like half of the days, right? So sometimes napping, sometimes dropping the nap. And we've kind of realized, like, I think we do need to kind of encourage her to drop that nap. Like, if she's really tired and needs it, we let her sleep. That's fine. But on the days she does nap, she goes to bed super late. Like, there have been a couple nights where it's been 11 p.m. If you know me, that's like way past my bedtime. I want to go to bed by 9. Ideally, I'd love her to go to bed at like 7 or 8. So I have a little time toddler free that we can just sit and watch a show or relax or whatever. But even on days she doesn't nap, sometimes she goes to bed at 8 or 9 still. So I think we're like, okay, she's probably ready to drop that nap. So we're trying to encourage that. But then I think it was a little tough over the weekend where we were going to all these different events. And if she's in the car when she's a little tired, she's like conked out. So she'll fall asleep. She took a couple cat naps, which I think just, yeah, our routines were all over the place. But yeah, so we might be dropping the nap. I think so. I think we're getting there. We'll see. And yeah, I think just in general, I'm reflecting on this year, enjoying some holiday time off. I'll be taking a couple weeks off at the end of the year, or at the end of this year and the start of the next year, and just kind of exploring like, how do I want to connect to my goals next year, which is always something I enjoy reflecting on, because my birthday also happens a few days after Christmas, a few days before the new year. So I think for me, it's an enjoyable time to reflect on, ooh, what intentions do I want to connect to? This last year, I connected to just slowing down and connecting to the simple joys. And that's been really fun. So one way we did that is like, we did more gardening and we got chickens this year. And it's been really fun just having this routine, this thing that I do that kind of forces us to slow down a little bit, right? Like in the mornings, I have to let out the chickens and make sure they've got water and food. And obviously when we were gardening, that was like, you know, one of the like experiences of our day, right? It wasn't always like going on big outings or doing things, but enjoying that time. And it's, I think, fun with a toddler because she loves all of that, and it's been enjoyable to do together. So sitting with those simple joys has been really nice. I've been continuing that like this winter and fall. I always kind of do a little bit of crocheting. That's something that I enjoy this time of year, but this year I kind of got into it a little bit more and have been actually like figuring out how to do it right instead of just like fumbling through like I usually do. So that's been fun. And I think this next year, I want to continue that and I want to maintain that, but also connect to, hey, how do I grow and connect a little bit more consistently to some other goals, right? With like a little bit more discipline, not intense discipline. That's not really my jam because I can get into the like anxious perfectionisty realm with it, but bringing it down to holding space for me, holding boundaries, saying no to what I need to say no to so that I can say yes, maybe take risks for myself, right? So kind of more related to like work and those kinds of things. So that's what I'm kind of reflecting on. I'm kind of mulling over what my word for 2025 is going to be. I'll probably talk about it in my newsletters or maybe here on the podcast coming up. So that's a little bit of my life check-in. Now let's get into our Reddit section of the day. So I have a Am I Overreacting post that I'm going to read, and then we'll talk a little bit about if this was my client coming in talking about this in session, what I might say, what we might work on, all of that. Again, obviously, in this little post, we don't have someone's full life story, all of the experiences, or anything like that. So this is purely just fun. I'm sure the person who wrote this isn't listening, but if they are, this isn't necessarily what you should do, but something that you might explore with your therapist, right? So just keep that in mind as you're hearing this. This is just like a fun read through and response. So am I overreacting? The title of this is MIL, mother-in-law, comment at 38 weeks pregnant. For context, I'm 38 weeks pregnant and absolutely huge. I'm in for a planned C-section next week as baby's already measuring 8 pounds. I was attending a funeral yesterday on my husband's side of the family for a distant relative. We have never met them, but it was for my husband's late granny's brother, so important. I had a good cry in the morning because absolutely nothing fits me. I'm exhausted, I'm over emotional, and just at my pregnant wit's end. I really didn't want to look ridiculous or wear something disrespectful. I honestly was not in a place to go, but wanted to show my respects. I just have to say, like, good on you for going, right? Like, that's, I think, hard enough to even go at all, but I'll keep reading. I arrive at the funeral and I am met with my husband's aunts and uncles who give me a big hug hello. My mother-in-law sees me, gives me an up and down and scoffs and says, nothing other than flat shoes, followed by a wry laugh. I responded with a snap of, yeah, what's your excuse? Because she was also wearing flat shoes. I think it's important to note that we're not close at all, and honestly, every time I'm in her company, I find she's tutting at me or dismissing me. Thoughts, please. My husband and I are arguing big time over this one. Okay, so first of all, I don't think you're overreacting. That is super frustrating. And yeah, like, first of all, kind of like I said, like, you're going to funeral, 38 weeks pregnant, like next week is your C-section. This is a really stressful time, especially since it wasn't like a close relative or someone you personally knew. I think just like even good on you for going, right? Like, I think if I was in that position, I would really be debating that, and I might not choose to go or want to go because you're not feeling your best, right? It's hard to function when you're that pregnant, and, you know, just physically, but also emotionally. You're going through so much, and yeah, you've got to like put on something appropriate and look nice for the funeral. Like, that's the last thing you want to do when you're that pregnant. And obviously you wore flat shoes. Like, duh. I mean, maybe I know there's some people that are fashionistas, like wearing heels when they're pregnant and all of that stuff, but obviously you wore flat shoes, right? And even if you weren't pregnant, it would make sense to wear flat shoes if that was more comfortable. And so that comment would be super frustrating, especially when it sounds like this person isn't very close to their mother-in-law. So it wasn't really done in a like fun jest or something. Like, there's no way we can kind of look at it as like that being a connecting moment. Obviously, we don't know what mother-in-law's intentions were. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes for her, but like, maybe not the best comment to give anyone, even if they weren't pregnant, right? Like, that would feel offensive and rude, and why, right? Like, so judgmental. And then we add in the layer of you are 38 weeks pregnant. Like, I think anyone should be pretty impressed that you made it to the funeral. So that comment is just like super out of line. So I think like it makes sense that you responded like, yeah, what's your excuse? Right? Like to be frustrated with that and to kind of give it back to her. Absolutely. And I also want to name like, I'm sure there's some like family dynamic stuff with your husband and his mom and being protective of her or whatever. And I would also imagine that it would make a lot of sense for you to be frustrated with him for not taking your side on that, standing up for you. It sounds like there have been arguments about her overreacting or what her comment was to mother-in-law. Obviously, right, like husband might be feeling some emotions. He's at a family member's funeral. It's tough, right? And like there does need to be some repair work with husband and this person who's writing this, right? Because he needed to stand up for her in that and understand that she would be feeling upset by that comment, right? It wasn't a kind comment. And then, especially when you're pregnant, you're feeling emotional. It was hard to even get there. Like that would feel extra icky. So, no, you're not overreacting. Sounds like maybe a good time to bring in some boundaries with mother in law. And I think, especially with a little one on the way next week, like definitely a good time for boundaries. So now we'll get into a little like psychoed or kind of therapy talk, or like what would be some good things to work on in this situation, because I'm sure that this is one that people can relate to, right? Like sometimes family members, and I think commonly in-laws, there can be some of these moments of friction, right, where someone's not feeling accepted and not being respected really for whatever reason, right? And a lot of times it has nothing to do with you, right? Like if you are the person who feels like, ooh, like my in-laws are like saying rude things or whatever, like it is about them, right? It is their own stuff, their own hangups. It is not about you, right? It's something that some work that they need to do, and yet we can't control if they're going to do the work. They're probably not going to do the work. Sometimes they do. But I think a lot of times in therapy with clients, our work is like, okay, and how do we practice acceptance around this and hold boundaries where you need to? Yes, it's great to work towards change, and in that, right, like I think maybe it would be important for husband to talk to his mom a little bit about that moment and express like what boundary that he wants there, right? So that might look like, hey, that kind of comment isn't okay. Even if it wasn't with poor intention, I need you to be intentionally respectful and intentionally kind to my partner at all moments, especially when they're 38 weeks pregnant and probably don't want to be at this funeral, right? Like let's be kind and let's be supportive of my partner and my relationship, all of these things, right? Like that is a conversation husband needs to have, not the person writing, right? Like she got that comment from mother-in-law, but this is her husband's parent. And a lot of times with couples, I'll talk about like the responsibility to shift that dynamic is whoever's parents that is, right? So it's his parents, it's his mom. He needs to kind of put in the legwork to see if there can be some improvement in that dynamic in that relationship. For the person writing in, the gal who, the headphone just popped out of my ear. The gal, okay, I'm back. The gal who's writing in here, like the work doesn't need to be on you to shift and change that dynamic, but more to look at what boundaries do I need to hold. And I think sometimes we can be on either end of it, right? So a lot of us maybe lean towards the people pleasing end where we're like, okay, I don't want to make this person feel uncomfortable by saying something rude, right? I maybe we end up feeling this urge to people please. Like they said the rude comment, but like I don't want to make them feel uncomfortable about that rude comment, right? So maybe be like, oh, yeah, I'm really pregnant and it's so uncomfortable to wear heels. So yeah, I just wore flats today, right? We might get into this people pleasing era of it. Or we might kind of go to the other end and snap back with something rude or mean, or intense, right? Which I won't say that what this person said was super intense, right? Like, oh, what's your excuse? Honestly, okay to bring a little sass, right? Like, I think that's what I would tell my client. Like, okay, cool. Like, that's okay to bring in a little sass, right? And maybe that doesn't feel super authentic with how you want to show up with others. And so, what I think can be like a helpful boundary is like, how can I connect to my authentic self-worth with who I am and know that this comment has nothing to do with me, right? So I don't need to people please and make them feel better about it. I also don't need to react and like respond in a way that matches their energy, right? Like if that's not going to feel good for me, I don't need to. Again, I'm not going to hate on anyone who would snap back. Like that's understandable. That's okay, I think, because that was a rude comment. But I think when we're like at the end of the day, do I want to feel authentic with how I've shown up and how I've interacted with people? We might kind of say, like, okay, I want to feel like I am communicating in alignment with my own values, right? And know that I'm worthy, know that this comment has nothing to do with me, and know that it's not okay to be walked over, right? It's not okay for others to be disrespectful of me, right? So we might respond with some more authenticity in a way that's not like intense or snapping back, but right, it might just genuinely show some confusion, right? Like we can look at it, it's like, that was a weird comment, right? So our response might be, what? Like show a little confusion that someone is making questions about your shoe choice, right? Or flats or heels. What? Oh, why wouldn't I be wearing flats today? Right? So kind of put it back on them to explain themselves, right? And if that person has to like pause and reflect, like they're either going to have to be like, oh, yeah, of course you're wearing flats. Me too. They're so comfy. Or they might, right, if they're going to like say what they're really thinking, and maybe that was like, oh, like you should be wearing heels, like they're going to have to more explicitly say that. And then we can challenge that if they respond and say, like, oh, we're at a funeral, you should be wearing heels. Then we can respond pretty directly and be like, it's not necessary to wear heels to a funeral. Also, I'm pregnant and I'm going to choose what's comfortable for me, right? Like we don't have to soften it. We don't have to be kind about it. We don't have to be rude about it, but we can be direct and we can be firm, right? So we might show some authentic, like, huh? Like why wouldn't I be wearing flats today? Or we can sometimes, and I think this is one that I sometimes go towards in my different family dynamics, is maybe bring a little like humor and kind of almost like let their comment right off and respond to it as if they didn't mean it in a negative way, right? I'd be like, oh yeah, like flats are so much more comfortable. I'm guessing that's probably why you wore them too. Don't you love flats, right? Like something where it's like we can shift it and bring it into a joining way. And like sometimes that might snap someone into be like, oh yeah, like that's not for me to say, right? And the goal of this isn't necessarily to change that how that other person is going to interact with us, right? Like, yeah, we're holding a boundary, and over time, like they're going to learn that they either have to talk to us differently or that they're not going to get the kind of reaction they want, right? So it does end up changing the dynamic because we're owning what we need. But the goal here isn't really to fully get them to understand what they said or apologize or take accountability or different pieces like that, but it's for us to hold our own boundaries, right? So in this situation where this is this person's mother-in-law, I would say just respond in a way that feels authentic, own your own experiences, or right, like I think it's okay to be like, sidestep in that conversation and I'm going to like interact with someone else, and I'm going to later have a conversation with my husband about how he needs to have a conversation with his mom, right? Like in that moment, if I was seeing them as a couple, right, like we maybe would talk about, okay, if this kind of dynamic is going to happen in the future, what can husband say in that moment, right? So that might look like him saying, hey mom, that's not a very nice comment, we're not going to go do that today, right? Or have some kind of conversation where he's the one shutting it down rather than wife feeling like she needs to. So yeah, I think that's my feelings on this. And I think just like with the topic of how do we hold our boundaries in moments when someone interacts with us in a way where maybe we're not, our goal isn't really to get them to fully understand or like kind of get us in a way where we can grow in our relationship, but more of it is a way of like, how do I hold my boundaries and not let that impact me as much, but also not feel like I have to people please and make someone else feel comfortable about something that they said that was rude, right? So we can find that middle path of like, okay, I'm going to respond authentically. I don't have to respond in a way that meets and matches their energy. But I also don't have to make them feel comfortable, right? I can say something that's going to allow them to feel the discomfort of their comment, right? So we are not taking on the discomfort. We allow that discomfort to sit there with the person who said the comment that wasn't okay. So that is the episode for today. So yeah, I'm going to try this out. I don't know what frequency it's going to be. I'm hoping to kind of get back to that every other week routine. We'll see where that goes. But let me know if you like this style or if you prefer more of the like big topic based things. And if you either have a story that you want to share here on the podcast, that you want to like write in and email me, or if you found a really good, like, am I overreacting or am I the asshole thing, like send it my way, either through email. I'll have all the links for things in the show notes, or you can send it to me on my Instagram as well. So yeah, we'll see how this goes. We'll test it out. It was fun for me. I liked, kind of reflecting on that in a fun but therapeutic way, kind of lighthearted, and I'm excited to test it out a little bit more. But if you enjoy this podcast, I greatly appreciate a rate and review wherever you're watching or wherever you're listening or watching. That helps me grow, and that's kind of my goal for this next year, is to grow this a little bit more. So I really appreciate you sharing this with others, giving it a rate or review so that it pops up for more people following along. I hope you have a nice rest of your day, rest of your week, and going into this holiday season.